Welcome to the Cannabis Cultivation and Science Podcast. I'm your host, Tad Hussey of Kiss Organics. This is the podcast where we discuss the cutting edge of growing from a science-based perspective and draw on top experts from around the industry to share their wisdom and knowledge. My guest this week is Rufus Akinrinlola. He is a Ph.D. candidate and graduate research assistant in the Entomology and Plant Pathology department at the University of Tennessee Knoxville. He works in the research programs of UT Specialty Crops and Field Crop Pathology, focusing on sustainable disease and integrated pest management systems, where he's co-mentored by Drs. Kelly and Zachariah Hansen. Rufus has a Master's of Science degree in Agronomy, focused on plant pathology from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and a Bachelor's of Science degree in Microbiology from Adekunle Ajasin University in Nigeria. His areas of interest include management of field and specialty crops, with emphasis on the improved adoption of integrated pest management and natural products in crop protection. Rufus was recently awarded a Developing Emerging Agricultural Leader and Talent grant by Corteva Agriscience in recognizing his potentials as an emerging crop protection future leader. Now on to the show. Hi Rufus, thanks for coming on the show today.
Hey, hi Ted, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So can we start off with you just telling listeners a little bit about yourself?
Okay. So my name is Rufus Akinrinlola. So I'm originally from Nigeria. And I studied microbiology. And then in 2016 and 2014, I moved to the US where I studied Agronomy and Plant Pathology in University of Nebraska. And 2018, I moved to Tennessee, where I'm currently rounding off my Ph.D. in Plant Pathology.
That's quite a journey. So you're currently a graduate research assistant at the University of Tennessee. You studied microbiology in Nigeria, and then Nebraska, and now Tennessee. So you're fairly well traveled. I'm just for listeners to understand. I know some people have mentioned in the past they're hard of hearing, so I may repeat some things Rufus shares just for the ease of those people. But I really wanted to share Rufus's his research because it's quite interesting. So you have a paper that I'm looking at right now that's called Hemp Fungicide Efficacy Field Trial for Leaf Spot and Powdery Mildew. Can you talk a little bit about how you're working with hemp and why you picked leaf spot and powdery mildew for your trial?
Yeah, thank you, Todd. So in Tennessee, since hemp was legalized in 2018, in Tennessee there have been a lot of people interested in growing hemp, and but there is so much little knowledge and information about diseases that are affecting hemp, since so little research has been, conducted in that area. And in Tennessee, among the most common disease that our growers reported to the professors and extension, especially leaf spot, one of the most important diseases. They especially affect in feed. You can have damage up to 50 to 60% of leaf, and when that happens, it can cause a lot of trouble, like leaf devolution and lesions on the leaf. And if it's not properly managed, it could, affect the quality of the leaf, including even the trichome. And in Tennessee, the most varieties of hemp that are produced are the hemp for CBD. Just for clarity, between hemp and marijuana, uh, in Tennessee, hemp is legal, whereas marijuana is illegal.
Yes.
To differentiate that, where the THC content, which is the psychoactive compound in hemp, is about 0.3 percent. So if it's higher than that, it is considered to be marijuana. So the hemp that we produce is the hemp for CBD, which is different for marijuana. So yeah, going back to why I choose the disease. So there are a lot of trouble with hemp leaf spot and powdery mildew, but there is no information. There's no a lot of knowledge on how to what can be used to control it. There's no data, and even products that are labeled, they are not labeled for hemp, since hemp is a relatively new plant to the state. So that's why we picked the research topic to look at some products that can be, can use to manage the disease.
Okay, so that makes sense. So there just isn't a lot of data out there or research. It really doesn't exist yet. This is a new crop, pretty much worldwide when it comes to the academic world. There's been some research I know out of Israel, and I've seen some work out of Israel or Italy as well. And we're starting to see research here in the United States on hemp, which, as you mentioned, is different than what the government calls marijuana, what growers call cannabis. But you're absolutely right there. Now, in terms of hemp leaf spot and powdery mildew, that's going to cause leaf necrosis. So we're losing the leaf's ability to photosynthesize. It's stressing the plant, which can lead to greater pest or decreased pest resistance, and also, like you mentioned, just affect the overall vigor and health of your crop, and which would affect your yields overall. So yeah, powdery mildew is one I'm more familiar with here in Washington State. I haven't had to deal with hemp leaf spot or anything like that myself, but I'm aware of what you're saying. So for this trial, you guys looked at the research shows. Let me see here. I'm looking at the paper now, and I'll attach it to the podcast page for people. But you set up a bunch of plots. Why don't you just tell me what did you compare in your research?
Oh, can you come again?
So you looked at 4 fungicide products, correct?
Yes.
Can you? I'll go ahead and list them because I'm reading this. So you have Stargus from Marone Bioinnovations, Death Guard, which is a General Hydroponic product, Exile from General Hydroponics, and Regalia from Marone Bio. What did you find? Now these it looks like a couple of these are biological fungicides.
Oh yeah. So the question is why did we select those products, right?
Yeah, let's start there. That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and as I said earlier, there are so little products, if exist at all, that is labeled for hemp. So, in recently, I think about last year or 2019, the EPA approved some products, about 59 of them, for hemp. And in Tennessee, only about 4 of those were approved by the Tennessee Department of Agriculture to be used on hemp. But even though they have been, approved, there was no data. And also, all the products, as you obviously say, they are like they call them reduced risk products or home listed. and then that means they are biological products, which potentially are less toxic to the environment or to human compared to the conventional products in that are used for controlling such disease on other crops. So basically, these products are selected because one, they have just been approved by the Tennessee and Department of Agriculture for use on hemp in Tennessee, and secondly, we are particularly interested in testing reduced risk products, which are more friendly to the environment.
So the reason you chose them are because you had to choose a product that was approved by the state of Tennessee for use on hemp, and then you wanted to go with more reduced risk products, so things that were organically listed or approved by OMRI, which makes sense. And one thing that you mentioned that I think is really important is that there is no data on these products from a university, and just because a product is approved does not mean it has good efficacy. So I think that's a really important point for growers to think about when they're choosing products to apply, because there's a lot of good sales information around these products, but not a lot of research. Now, why not an oil-based product? So the first thing I think of would be something like Sulfoil X, which is a mineral oil-based product that's OMRI listed, but it's not necessary. I don't know if it's been approved in Tennessee for that specific use. But wouldn't pretty much any oil-based product kill a fungus?
Oh, you say with any product kill fungus? Is that what?
Any like oil-based, because it looks like you went with biological, and then the regalia is a knotweed extract, and then the exile is a potassium salts of fatty acids. Is there a reason you didn't choose an oil-based product in your trial, or was there just not one available on the market that was approved?
Yeah. Another criteria we use also to select data. Select a product to be tested is we also look at some other states. What are the products that have been tested by other scientists in other states? So when we looked at those, are the ones that we found that there are some in other states that have been tested. And when scientists are interested in some products in other states, it shows that there's a green light that such products may be effective. So, but when you look online and there is no any data. You look at scientific database like plant disease management report. If you look at that database and you find information on a particular product in a nearby state or states within the same region, you can have some green lights whether testing, because ultimately although we want results, but ultimately also we also want to be able to recommend products to our growers, and we want something that will be effective for them. So, when we look at the scientific literatures from other states, these are the ones that we see. Okay, maybe it has been tested, maybe once in other states, and it shows some potential. So that's why we let those. So not necessarily because the other ones that maybe oil-based products are not effective. No, it's not because we not really have any initial information that can which we use to qualify as a criteria, for testing products.
Yeah, and to be fair, as a scientist, I mean, you want to test everything. You want to do all this research, but at the end of the day, you have to pick something. You have to start somewhere, and you can't test 20 products, or your
You get
statistical
it.
significance would be too
That's
low. So
yeah. If you want to test every product, in fact, you're gonna have numerous of them to test, because there are a
yeah.
lot of products there, a lot of products, and so you have to go have some criteria to go by, and not of all those products. If you end up testing all of them, that does not mean you're gonna have like good information. I mean, good efficacy from it. So at the end of the day, you want a product that's gonna actually have some good efficacy, so that your growers that you are serving as an extension professor, my PI, Dr. Hansen, here is an extension specialist for specialty crops, and at the end of the day, he received calls from growers to get to give them recommendation on something like this.
Mhm.
So at the end of the day, we want to be able to have like positive recommendation, something that we can actually say, oh, this is effective in Tennessee, and you can use it.
So you want to find something that will be effective, that you can recommend to growers, and that
Hmm.
works. It doesn't matter if it works in Alaska or in Europe. It matters if it works in Tennessee, because those are
Yeah,
the growers that you work with. That makes
yeah.
sense. So you set up this experimental design, and these plots, you were hand watering 2 to 3 times per week, and weeding with mechanical cultivation. And once you had, it looks like I'm reading your report here, leaf spot severity around 2%, you started the fungicide applications and repeated
Hmm.
7 times at 10-day intervals.
Yeah,
And then you did disease ratings to measure the severity of the disease, and the amount of disease symptoms and
yeah.
incidents you were seeing on the leaf. So all of that sounds great. Let's just dive into the results. What did you find with these 4 products compared to your control, as far as reduction? Let's start with leaf spot.
Yeah. As you probably see from the results section, the research table that's prepared, uh, most of the products have some level of efficacy. Uh, we have, okay, let me describe the treatment. In total, we have like 6 treatments, and one of the treatments is the positive control. The positive control means we know that this is effective. It can control this pathogen, and that is the quarters. And even though it's not labeled for hemp in Tennessee, we use that as our check. You can, so that when something works, we'll be able to control it with our treatment. Then there's another treatment. We have the untreated treatment, which is, it means it is not treated with anything. That means the disease is there, the disease continues to increase. It was not treated with anything. Then the 4 other treatments are tested products, which include the Stagos, the Regalia, the DevGuard, and the Exile. And you can see from the result table that the most effective one among the 4 products is the Regalia, and Regalia has a moderate, relatively higher efficacy compared to the other 2 products. And if you can see, we look at to summarize the efficacy, we look at the you look at the disease index table. Disease index means the summary of the index, and the summary of the incidence and the severity. So the incidence measured out of, let's say, out of the whole plant, how what is the proportion of the plant has disease. For instance, if the plant has 5 branches, is it all the branch that has at least a symptom of leaf spot, or just one of the branch, or all of the branch? So that is incidence. Then the severity, we look at the leaf. You know, on each leaf of the plant, how many parts or what proportion or percentage of that leaf has the disease. So when we take the data, both incidence and severity data, we multiply that and divide by 100 to determine our disease index. So that is summary data. So if you look at the disease index table for regalia, you will see that our value during our 3 days data collection date, you will see that it's always lower than than the untreated. Can you see that? The untreated has, like, for instance, during the first day, the untreated has like 11 disease index, while the regalia has 6. And if you look at the final date, regalia has 16, and the untreated has 24. So that shows that is controlling disease compared to the untreated. Again, if you look at the area under disease progress, that is also known as disease intensity across the trial. If you want to summarize disease across the date or during the period of the trial, so we also use that term also to describe the disease. So you also look at the untreated, which is our negative control. You see that the data is higher than regalia. Regalia has lower disease on disease area under disease progress compared to the untreated. The untreated has 643. Regalia has only 381. Also, if you look at the letter after the value, regalia has letter B, whereas the untreated has letter A. That shows that the letter is different. So when the letter is different, it shows that the values or the efficacy of that treatment is different from the untreated. So yeah, you can see that. Then we now go to the next effective one is Stagos. We can see that Stagos, Exile, then followed by Stagos. So for the leaf spots, but regalia, if you look at DevGuard, you can see that the number for DevGuard is high. Is similar, not almost. It's similar to that of untreated control, and that means the plant that are treated with DevGuard is not different. I mean, the disease
not
was not
statistically
different.
Significant.
Exactly.
Data.
So
there's not a. Yeah, I see what you're saying. So to summarize, what you're saying is between the untreated and DevGuard, when it came to leaf spot, there was no statistically significant difference. You had potentially a 2% reduction, but your standard deviation was probably greater than that, is my guess.
Yeah.
And then you had Exile with 44% disease reduction, Stargus
Yeah.
with 43% and Regalia showing 41%. So that's why they have the B after the disease intensity. So fairly moderate disease reduction. Now, one question I had in my head while I was listening to this was, did you spray the untreated crop with water as a way of removing that as a variable in comparison to these other treatments? Like, could just the application of water reduce the amount, the fungus growth on?
No, that's a good question. We did not spray with water because this study is a field study. If it was a greenhouse study where there is no rainfall, we normally spray with water. But the field trial, when you spray your product, and even though you do not spray the untreated with water, rain is always falling, and so the same rainwater can fall on the plants and have the same effect on the disease.
Mm-hmm.
So we do not spray with water, and that does not really have any effect on the treatment.
Okay. I was curious because I've heard that even water with powdery mildew, I don't know with leaf spot, can help suppress powdery mildew, but obviously it also increases the humidity on the leaf surface and could lead to greater powdery mildew growth too.
Yeah.
So I was just curious about that. So you're saying with the rainfall and everything else, you guys chose not to because you wanted your control to be most similar to what a grower would do in Tennessee, which is would be an application. Mm-hmm. Okay. One other question I had with the microbial products that you applied, did you do any microbial testing to see if the microbes were present in the concentrations that were claimed on the labels?
Oh, that's a good question. We did not test that. That alone is another study to do. That's a good question. We were not, planning towards that direction. We just want to test it in the field to see.
Okay. And to be clear, I'm not bringing these things up to criticize your work in the least bit, because it's impossible to look at every variable, but it's important when evaluating a study to ask questions, to think about what the implications you can draw from the data. So one thing you could say is, well, maybe those bottles weren't as viable because they had been sitting on a shelf for a long time. It may be worth going back at some point as a separate researcher and looking at that, but that doesn't it doesn't invalidate your results at all. So I want to clarify that for listeners that I'm certainly not criticizing your research.
you give us a very good research topic to think on, and that's a very good one. That would be another maybe master's project.
Well, we should talk because I work with a gentleman, our research scientist who I work with, Dr. Ben Higgins. He and I are always coming up with new research we would love to see around cannabis and hemp. So I'd love to stay in touch and talk about this. But I'm glad to see more of this research is coming out. So that's the most important thing, is that we're starting to get a body of knowledge that we can begin to learn more about this crop, because none of the research we're seeing right now is definitive. It's just to start pointing us in a direction to say, hey, this is worth looking at, so and that's where we have to start. Well, let's talk about powdery mildew. So your results with and this was what made me think of the water thing, is the comparison of the leaf spot versus powdery mildew results. Because let's just start with DefGuard. You got no significant reduction in disease intensity with DefGuard on leaf spot, but how about with powdery mildew?
Yeah, the powdery mildew, we can see that It's like if you look at DevGuard and Stagos, they are like they work in an inverse inverse way. The Stagos control disease on uh, leaf spot, but powder mildew it was relatively ineffective. But that guy became effective in controlling powder mildew, even though it was not, effective in controlling. It was interesting when we saw the result. So we can see that guy control about 52% disease control compared to the control, um, whereas uh, the Stagos only control less than, you know, very low disease.
So the Stargus and DefGuard kind of switched efficacy
Hmm.
when it came
Yeah,
to spot and powdery mildew. So DefGuard not effective against leaf spot, 52% effective against powdery mildew. Stargus
yeah,
43% effective against leaf spot, which was one of your higher marks, and yet only
yeah,
20% against powdery mildew. So very not
yeah,
really effective at all.
hmm,
But then your other two products, Exile and Regalia, and
yeah.
I have to go back here because I'm not familiar. I know Regalia is a knotweed extract. Is Exile a microbial, or is that the potassium salts of fatty acids?
Yeah, it's potassium salts of fatty acid. That's exact. And regalia is extract of this plant, root nuts, and yeah, regalia has been very effective generally on both disease, as you can see,
Yes.
and also, and exa is more effective on the powder mildew.
So you basically, with Regalia, saw no powdery mildew. I mean, 99% disease reduction.
Hmm.
So it was barely you were barely able to find it. That's amazing. That you can't get better data than that on efficacy. That's quite good. So
And
oh, go ahead.
and again, I do want to point the fact that in seed study, uh, powder mildew trial is always compared to indoor trial. Now, powder mildew is always relatively um, compared to in greenhouse, it's relatively low compared to the prayer is always very low compared to indoor. So one of the reasons why you have that level of highly control maybe the fact that disease prior, you know, in outside is low because as you said earlier, rainfall can affect the powder mildew prior. You know, when there is water, it can reduce the building up of spores on the leaf.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you now put an effective product, it easily control the disease. So that's one of the strengths of the regalia. The fact that, and also, I've done several other tests in the greenhouse, and we are hoping to push out another publication by the end of this year. Green for ton of greenhouse trials, and we have tested some new products, and I'm excited about that. You're gonna see some result as well.
Wonderful. I would love to see that when that's available. So you're speculating that the spore pressure from powdery mildew is lower outdoors than indoors, and the rainfall events help wash away or don't allow the PM to get as an effective of a hold on the leaf itself.
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying?
yeah. I've worked both in both systems, so I've seen powder mildew prior in both systems, and I've seen how the difference that in the greenhouse you have a humidity and warm temperature. Greenhouse they control they control environment, which
Mm-hmm.
is very conducive for powder mildew. to develop. And there's no that seasonal or occasional rainfall that washes away the plant. There's no high temperature that very high temperature during the summer that can you know. So as I said, in the greenhouse, it's always if I can share some of the pictures I have. If you look at the picture of the greenhouse infested powdery mildew and the feed infested, you're gonna see very different. There's very good difference between them.
Oh,
And
so they
for the
physically display powdery mildew. The same species of powdery mildew will physically display differently in a greenhouse leaf than an outdoor leaf, is what you're saying.
That's a good question that you raised now, because
Well,
because
when you were talking, my thought was, I wonder if we could do targeted heat treatments or targeted humidity treatments similar to what you might experience outdoors as a way of
yeah,
lowering spore pressure in a controlled environment. I mean,
yeah,
there's so many different ways to approach this.
yeah.
Um,
That's a very good. In our greenhouse study, the we have been able to identify the species that cause the greenhouse powder mildew, but we did not look at the. Even though, generally speaking, in Tennessee, we know that gonovinomycete is the species that causes the powder mildew in Tennessee, but we have not looked at the species itself, whether it's Spadice, and there are different species that cause the powder mildew, but we've not been able to identify for the for the feed
okay,
pathogen the feed powder mildew.
so what you're saying is that you identified the species for the greenhouse, which is
Yeah.
Golovinomyces, but you
Ambrosia, actually, it's Ambrosia. We had the identification. Gonovinomyces ambrosiae, which is one of the most common powder mildew pathogen in this environment.
okay, but just for listeners, powdery mildew is sort of a catch-all term for numerous species that produce a white powdery substance on a leaf surface. So,
Yeah.
and they don't all cross between plant to plant. So you could have two different species of plants, and one could be infected and the other one could not, just
Yeah.
based on that particular species of powdery mildew and what plants it can infect. So.
hmm Yeah.
Well, getting back to your research here, so you found neither of the biological products, interestingly enough, was able to provide moderate efficacy across leaf spot and powdery mildew.
Yeah.
But both of the non-biologicals, so you had an extract and then the potassium
hmm
salts of fatty acids, showed good efficacy across leaf spot and powdery mildew.
Yeah.
Did you find any degradation of trichomes or anything that affected the final product with any of these applications?
Okay. So the question is
So,
does any of the treatment affect the trichome, or is that what you mean?
yeah, the quality of the final product. So obviously, as a grower, if you try to avoid spraying things as we move
hmm
into flower. Now, sometimes you have to, but that can affect the quality, whether
Yeah.
that's the terpenes or the tricho development of the product itself, the crop.
Mm.
Did you find any differences based on these treatments as to the final, hemp quality?
That's a very good question. Seriously, I begin to think about one direction. As we did test the amount, the quantity. We did a quantitative analysis of the CBD, which is I said earlier that most of the hemp that we tested are for CBD production. So we did test if our treatment affects the quantity of the CBD, content in each
Okay.
plant. But we did not find any difference. There was no any difference. But as we are talking now, I begin to think about the chemical analysis. Maybe that may be a very good, because he talked about degradation, and he also raised a very good point. It may be nice to look at the qualitative in terms of chemical analysis of the products. I mean, the CBD itself, whether there is a contaminant or whether there is maybe degradation, or so maybe that may be a very good thing to test. But we've not looked at that.
Yeah, one concern would be if a product contained levels of heavy metals, then that would be something that you could be potentially risking with your crop, even though these products, by nature of being registered as a fertilizer or a pesticide. Yeah. I'm not sure with pesticides, but I'm pretty sure that that's the same case. I know with fertilizers, you have to get tested for heavy metal analysis, but that would be something to look at. But so you didn't find any statistically significant results when you measured the CBD, the cannabinoids, across all four treatments. Did you see any biomass differences? So were the yields, I would assume that the regalia plot would have higher yields because you had a greater amount of disease reduction, so the plants were probably healthier. Did you find that, or what were the results there? Because I don't see them here in the paper itself.
Yeah, we look at the biomass. Obviously we saw that, those more highly effective treatment has like increase in biomass, but statistically, again, they were not different. But you can see, obviously, I mean, visually, you can see that the number is higher, greater than the known to untreated. But when we do the analysis, statistical analysis, there was no significant difference, statistically different. So
okay, that's let me make sure I understand this, because I think this is an important point. So you're saying that even though the biomass visually was greater in the treatment plots than the untreated, based when you did the statistical analysis, when you did the math on it, it was not statistically significant yield increase.
Yeah.
That's a huge point I just want to emphasize, because that's really interesting, because if that were to play out as more research becomes available, your next table here, table 2, shows the cost of these products. You're anywhere from $500 to over $1,700 per acre across a season.
Yeah.
Well, in theory, that's a waste of money if we're not getting biomass increases, yield increases, right?
Yeah, it's true. One question we always talked about again is what level of statistically significant or different is financially or economically significance. What level of statistically different or is economically significant. In IPM, one objective of IPM is to reduce disease to below economic threshold.
Yes.
And that is a threshold that injury threshold, we call it economic injury threshold. That's a threshold that is going to cause economical damage. So when you apply your product, you may be able to, at the end of the season, be able to know that if this product, even though it controls maybe little disease, does that little disease affect my economy? Does it bring some profit?
Yeah.
So those are the questions that also that needs to be considered.
That's a really, really good point, Rufus. So just because it's not so the whole point of all of this is to is to stable, figure out what the economic threshold of a disease is. So,
Yeah.
if just because it's not statistically significant,
Yeah.
from a grower perspective, it could still be economically viable.
Yeah.
It could still be
Yeah.
worth it.
Yeah. That's a thought.
That's a very, very good point. So even though the research may not show significance, the visually you're saying, so in theory, if we apply Stargus and it costs us around $500 for the season, and we get half a pound more out of that crop, or a pound, or whatever would make the difference, then it's worth doing that application once we figure in the cost of the product and the labor
Yeah.
associated and the equipment to make
Yeah.
that application. So excellent point. That's a very good way of explaining that. So I want to kind of turn away from this research. I looked you up on Google Scholar. You've done a lot of research over the years here. And one of the things you focused on is a lot of microbial products, or dealing with microbial disease. But I wanted to just talk really quickly about you've looked at different Bacillus strains for promoting plant growth, and I'm curious, what your research was on corn and wheat and soybean, it looks like.
Yeah.
What Bacillus species do you think would be most promising for research with hemp or cannabis?
That's a very good. That's a very good question. And talking about my some of my previous research on with Bacillus, with my experience, although I've not tested specifically. We're not trying to see the effect of Bacillus on the powdery mildew. Even though some of the on hemp, even though some of the product that we tested contain Bacillus, and we've not like trying to look at the product because we are Bacillus, or we're trying to look at their mode of action. But in my previous uh, research, I've looked at effect of Bacillus on different crops, including corn, soybean, and wheat. And some of the one that we found to be very effective in promoting growth. So when I did this study, I looked at their effect in promoting growth, whether in the absence of disease or whether the disease is present. So that what I mean is that I did not include like a pathogen into the rhizosphere to cause disease. So we just look at normal soil, feed soil. We put we inoculate the rhizosphere with the bacillus, and we watch the plant grow in the greenhouse and see whether the bacillus is going to increase the growth in that environment. And what we found that Bacillus pimilis and some penibacillus as well, they were effective in increasing corn growth, and other ones including Savensis and Bacillus megatherium was also effective, I think, from soybean. So that's basically what I've done with Bacillus on other other crop. In my greenhouse experiment with powder mildew on hemp, we tested some products, and one of the products has a Bacillus, I think Bacillus subtilis, and I think it was, you know, effective, relatively effective compared to other products that were tested. So yeah, that's what I could say about that.
So you found by applying rhizobacteria, you got increased plant growth and yield, up to 200% increased shoot weight on corn. But you were doing it sort of like you said in a vacuum, so there was no competition for these Bacillus strains, like you would find in a normal soil or media. But you did find that they were able to increase yields overall. So it's promising research, but not definitive at this point, is what you would say in terms of adding these Bacillus species to a crop.
Yeah, well, you can see in that study, those strains that were tested, talking about the one that increased very, very out to let me look at it now. Penny Bacillus, Bacillus offensis, Bacillus simplex. The increased growth in that condition, we inoculate this plant, the roots with its bacillus, and the increased growth. Then know that these were very isolated, that we isolated from the soil. These are not like products. Mm-hmm. These are not like commercialized products. And the objective of the study was like, bacillus, they are they can adapt to a very harsh environment. And also, we also know that some of the bacillus, even though they might be effective in a particular environment or region, when you take them to another region to apply, they may be inconsistent in their application. So all of these strains that I work with in this particular study, we isolated them in that environment that we intend to use them, so that we can see where they can, increase growth in that environment. And the objective was this product was going to be developed for that environment. So that's what the intention. So, and as you can see, most of them work very well on corn in a greenhouse in that environment. So the next study, which probably they are going to take on, is the most effective one to like take it to the feed environment, maybe in a microplot trial, and see whether they're going to have the same effect they have in the greenhouse.
So basically, you're taking the Bacillus strain, and these are not commercially available strains.
Yeah.
And you're going to take those, and since they worked essentially when they were the only bacteria applied to the roots, and they did show good results. Now you want to take that and apply it in a field scenario and see if you get similar results there, is what you're saying. And I think. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I said that would be another research objective. Now that I did my research in the greenhouse, and the further study now would be to look at the most effective ones, to take them to the feed environment and apply them to corn and see if they're going to have the same effect they have in the greenhouse.
Yeah, and one thing, this is probably less something you're familiar with, but what will happen is I find on the commercial side, on the sales product side, someone would take a paper like this and say, okay, just to find one, Bacillus megaterium. They wouldn't worry so much about the R181. So it's not that particular strain, but they would say, okay, well, Bacillus megaterium is shown to increase shoot weight by 200%. And then they would go and buy Bacillus megaterium from, China or, on Alibaba or something as a powder, put it on a label, and then they would sell that and make these claims. So, because the biostimulant or microbial industry on the product side is growing dramatically. And so I would just suggest that people do their research and then look a little deeper into the product itself, because the strain matters. It matters a lot. We can't just assume that all Bacillus subtilis is going to have the same effect. It doesn't. And we also can't assume that something, in vitro or in your plot is going to have the same effect as it would in my potting soil or in my garden. So people need to be careful with data and how they interpret it, to not draw conclusions that may not be true. That's all. Because the cannabis industry has a lot of products, and they're not all good, and it's something that we talk about a lot on this podcast. So.
Yeah, you make a very good point, and I just want to emphasize on that again. If you look at my data on the feed fungicide hemp trial, you're gonna see that DevGuard and Stagos, you know that they have the same species of Bacillus, right? Mm-hmm. Are you aware of that?
So both products have the same species of Bacillus, is what you're saying?
Yeah, the same species of Bacillus, the different strain.
But different strains. Okay, I missed that.
Yeah, and you can see that they have different effectiveness. So
wow.
It's very interesting, right?
Yeah.
So that's how it is with microorganisms. That they are the same species does not mean they're going to have the same mode of action. Because now if you look at the second objective in that microbial assay study, you see that if you look at the second objective is to look at the mode of actions of the Bacillus. And what you will find is that these Bacillus have different mode of actions. Even though they may be the same species, and they're going to have different traits. They're going to have different traits. For instance, if it is antibiotics against bacteria, they may be the same species. They're still going to have different antibiotics efficacy against other bacteria or other fungi. They may be able to produce, one may be able to produce siderophore, and the other strain cannot produce siderophore. One may be able to maybe produce some plant growth hormone, and the other one, the other strain cannot do that. So it is very important that we consider the strain when we are talking about that one Bacillus substillate work does not mean all Bacillus substillate gonna work, and that is why it's very important that extensive study is done on every strain of Bacillus or any plant growth promoting agent or plant or biological control agent. Extensive research must be done on that strain before it can actually be released for commercialization.
That's really interesting, and I think it shows too just how much research there is available to be done on hemp and cannabis, and that's for me that's the most exciting thing about this plant, and one of the things that I'm most passionate about with this industry is that we can do this research. And even if the research that say my good friend and colleague Ben Higgins is doing, even though it's not backed by a university, it can be preliminary work where we could say, hey, we're seeing statistical trending that this product may have this suppression effect, or running nutrients at this level will cause this sort of plant growth response. to where then a university or someone like yourself, a researcher, could then repeat the trial and get more more data to make a better decision for growers long term. So it's an exciting industry to be a part of, and we need the research that people like yourself are doing. It's just so important. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, sure. There's more research. That needs to be done. Lot of them. Yeah, there's more. There's a lot of things, a lot of questions that still need to be answered. A lot of, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate it. I hope we can stay in touch and share research and learn from each other. And I thank you so much for taking the time today to share your research with this audience, and appreciate what you're doing.
Sure. Thank you, Ted. I really appreciate, thanks for having me. I always look for opportunity to share the result of my research, because I always say that what's the use of research if those people who need information can get it?
Yeah.
So it's always, I'm always exciting to share the result of my research. So I thank you for having me to do this.
It's great. So thank you again. And yes, I will continue to work to share this research directly with growers so that they can help make better decisions in their gardens. So
yeah.
Thanks again. Have a wonderful day, Rufus.
Thank you. You too. Bye.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
That was Rufus Akinrinlola, and you are listening to the Cannabis Cultivation and Science Podcast. I'm your host, Tad Hussey. I'll post pertinent links on the podcast page at www.kisorganics.com. Just click on the Learn tab and then Podcast. Thanks for listening.